Hello, YouTube family. This is Alex here from Banganta House German Shepherds. Today is September 21st, 2025. I haven't recorded in a while. I had some personal setbacks and was not able to record in quite some time. So I hope my audience will revisit this channel and not forget about this channel. It took me a while to grow this audience. Today's video is a two-part video. It's done in documentary style. The point of the video is to discuss the East German Shepherd, the DDR German Shepherd. Now, there are other videos on my channel about this topic. We talked about the subbreed existing from 1945, the fall of the Reichstag in Nazi Germany, all up until 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall. For those of you old enough to remember, President Ronald Reagan said, "Mr. Gorbachev, take down this wall." And of course, that wall was the Berlin Wall, put up in 1961, physically dividing East from West Germany, and with East Germany being allied to the Warsaw Pact, and the head of the Warsaw Pact was the Soviet Union, in relationship to NATO. Now, NATO's borders have expanded significantly since the late 80s, early 90s, and we could say that we won the Cold War because former Warsaw Pact countries such as Poland, so those countries which were part of the Soviet bloc are now aligned with NATO, and other countries have joined. For example, Finland. Sorry for the dog barking in the background there, a little rowdy. Finland, which is right next to the border of Leningrad, now again called St. Petersburg, is now closely a member of NATO. For those who remember history, in 1939 to 1940, the Soviet Union attacked Finland. It was called the Winter War of 1939 to 1940. Reason being is that the German armies went from Poland through Ukraine up to Moscow, and they're going to go through Finland down to St. Petersburg, surrounding in a pincer movement to attack Moscow and gain an early victory. By the Soviet Union attacking Finland preemptively, it prevented the northern strike, forcing Hitler's armies to go straight into the country with a lot of miles to cover. And that's the same path Napoleon followed in 1812. Napoleon burned Moscow to the ground in 1812. So for all of you who know history, in 1812, we had a war of 1812 because the British were stealing our sailors in the high seas to fight who? To fight Napoleon. Russia was fighting Napoleon. And so the war of 1812, we were against Britain, but Britain and Russia combined were against Napoleon. That geography of 1812, where the mountains are, where the rivers are, where everything is geographically, has not changed, even though that was the 19th century, the beginning of the 19th century. And the Soviet Union no longer exists. Russia, the RSFSR, exists. And so geographically, it's the same country as it was in the 19th century and the 20th century. From a war attack perspective, multiple countries now being on Russia's border, are within the same striking distance as they would have been in World War II or in World War One or in 1812. So from a geographical perspective, nothing changed. Governments changed. It's no longer a socialist country, but geographically, it's the same country with the exact same points of attack as it would be in a conventional war. Why do I bring all this up? This video is divided into two parts. Part two will be the history of the East German Shepherd with pictures of that subtype, including a detailed accounting of several lines of the East German Shepherd. Line 5A, line 12A, line 12B. We're going to talk about the Wurlitzer system, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which was a rating system used by the East Germans to rate dogs. Like, for example, if a dog was rated 555/56, it meant something, and I'll explain that later in the video. There will be timestamps in the video, so if you want to skip the first half of the video, which is historical context, you're free to skip the historical context and go straight to the dog context. So basically, this video is in two parts. In part one, we're going to do a little bit of a history lesson for World War II and what led to the East German Shepherd. Because how can you describe the East German Shepherd and not what led up to it, World War II? You can't speak about that breed without talking about how it was created. And in part two, we're going to make it very dog focused. But in part one, it'll be historically focused. Now, why do I make such a video? I could have made a dog video only because this is a dog channel. Well, I'm making this video in two parts because A, it's my channel, so I kind of decide the content. But realistically, today's schools, high schools and colleges, don't focus on European history to the degree they should. This war, World War II, 1939 to 1945, the Great Patriotic War, was a war to end all wars. In civilian deaths alone, Chinese and Soviet combined, we lost 4.5 million people in this world out of 6 million total. It was a war that involved every country of the world, internationally. It was a war that reshaped the world we now live in. And so the great three, Franklin Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill, at the Yalta Conference, between the three of them, defined the world as we know it today. And so we can talk about dogs all we want to, but we're not just dog people. We live in the context of the world that we live in as human beings. And I think that that history is lost and is becoming lost. The history of World War II is not just the history of the Holocaust. It is much more than that. And I think in the context of today's political climate of Democrats, Republicans, and all this jazz, we're forgetting some very basic things that united us back 80 years ago, which was to fight the scourge of mankind, Nazi Germany. And so the terms fascism and Nazism are used too lightly today. We're going to talk about actual Nazis, Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, who took power 20 years before Hitler. And for those of you who can stomach hearing his voice, in this video, I'm going to play an audio and video of Adolf Hitler. I'm also going to play the voice of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. These are gathered from historical news archives. The audio will be grainy because it's filmed in World War II. And the video will not be sharp because they didn't have modern camera equipment back then. But I think it's worth seeing FDR, Stalin, and Churchill at the Yalta Conference, which shaped the world as we know it even today. Now, what do we say about World War II that is different than World War One? So let's begin this video with the historical context before we talk about dogs. Let's talk about history a little bit. World War One was 1914 to 1918. If I remember my history correctly, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was from 1879 to 1918 under the Habsburg dynasty. In World War One, we had multiple Slavic nationalities, the Croats, the Poles in the form of Galicia, which now is partly owned in Poland and partly in Ukraine. You had Moravia, which was in former Yugoslavia. You had Bosnia and Herzegovina, former Yugoslavia. So you had multiple Slavic nationalities under Austro-Hungarian rule. That included Austria proper itself, Prussia, not Germany, Prussia, Hungary, what became parts of Romania, Transylvania specifically, part of Romania, the Balkans, and Bulgaria. And so you had a lot of Slavic nationalities controlled by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which limited their rights and rights to self-determination. The killing of Archduke Ferdinand was the spark that finished the nationalist tensions across all these nationalities living under one common empire. World War One was the first mechanized war. We saw airplanes for the first time in World War One. We saw submarines for the first time in World War One. We saw machine guns for the first time in World War One, although you could argue the Gatling guns of the Civil War were the predecessor to modern machine guns. But those were the size of cannons. They were not the size of handheld weapons. So we also had tear gas in World War One. So World War One was the world's first mechanized war, when the Polish resistance and the Polish army started rushing German troops, Austro-Hungarian troops, on horseback and cavalry with swords drawn that were met by machine gun fire. So this is the first war in which the traditional means of war, cavalry, was met by machine gun fire. And so World War One saw some of the most brutal mass-scale death ever known to man. And so you could say World War One and World War Two are related because they're just 20 years apart between these two wars. And you could say it's a continuation of the exact same war because many of the same players are involved. But there's a fundamental difference. There are several fundamental differences. First, in terms of military tactics, World War One was a stalemate whereby the soldiers dug themselves into trenches on both sides. There was barbed wire on both sides, poison gas on both sides. And so anybody that crossed the no man's land, tried to capture territory, wound up being killed very quickly in the killing fields. And that war was 4 years of no movement of capturing land. It's basically soldiers firing across each other, dug into trenches with barbed wire and mines between them, with no ability to cross and capture territory on the move. From a military tactics point of view, the lightning strike, the Blitzkrieg, was a new invention by the Germans, which got away from the stalemate of World War One. Why? You would soften up the enemy with artillery fire and dive bombers in the form of Stukas, seizing control of the skies, followed by tanks and troop movement, rapidly using tanks to capture land as the tanks moved. Poland was captured in only 8 weeks. France, a very large country, was only captured in about 8 weeks as well. This new style of warfare, where you didn't dig into trenches and you captured land with air power softening of the enemy, followed by artillery, followed by tanks, followed by troops in waves. the Blitzkrieg, was a new style of fighting where air dominance is established first, followed by artillery and tank dominance. This mechanism of fighting is still in a conventional war is still the main method we still use today, believe it or not, in a conventional war, not an atomic war. God forbid we have an atomic war. So, from a tactical point of view, World War II had more modern airplanes, more modern submarines, more modern tanks. We had radio communication. We had the beginnings of radar around 1943 to 1945. It was more perfected by 1947. By that point, the war ended. We had radio communication from earth to ship, from land to ship, and land to air. Radio communication became very important in controlling troop movements. So it was a modern war. And people think, well, that was a long time ago. No, it was not a long time ago. My grandmother lived during World War II, and I'm 58. So it was my grandparents' generation. That's not long ago. People think, oh, it was a long time ago. No, it was not 100 years ago. It was not 200 years ago. It was only 75 to 80 years ago, depending on which country you count as being the one invaded. So World War II is a monumental war. What's another difference between World War I and World War II? One of the fundamental differences between World War I and World War II was in World War I, there was a classic case of nationalism by multiple nationalities, each wanting their own country. That would be the equivalent of Israel and Palestine today, where each country, each nationality wants that land. Well, that was similar to World War I. Yugoslavians wanted what became Yugoslavia to be their country. Poles wanted their own country, or parts of what became Poland in Galicia. Ukrainians wanted to be their own country. Romanians wanted their own country. And so what became Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia and a large parts of Eastern Europe, the Slavic nationalities, wanted to be free of Austro-Hungarian rule. So each nationality wanted to be their own country. But there was no ideology of worldwide domination and the ideology of a superior race, Übermenschen and Minormenschen, Superman and minor men. There was no ideology of racism as the guiding principle of occupation of territories and peoples. It was each nation wanting to be its own country and for its own people under its own flag. That was the cause of World War I. By contrast, in World War II, you had a megalomaniac bent on seizing control of the world and reshaping it to his will and controlling the Slavs as a slave race, even though they're both white, but they're inferior whites as far as Hitler was concerned, under the control of a master race. And so the annihilation of a specific nationality, Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, communists, was the goal of Hitler's scourge. He sought to control the world as we know it, but not just under the need to control territory for farmland, expansion of territory for living space, expansion of territory for natural resources, coal, iron, gas, oil. No, he saw the expansion of land and grab land from other countries to fulfill his vision of a superior race ruling the world. This idea that one race built everything on this earth, cities, governments, states, the white race, and its descendants therefore should inherit the bounty of this earth as the rightful heirs to that bounty. This nationalistic view that the Aryan race should control and conquer all other nationalities and all other races, particularly blacks and Jews, are inferior, that worldview was the core impetus behind his need for both revenge against what were the allies of World War I and against his governing philosophy of the Third Reich of World War II. So the tactics were different. We had a Blitzkrieg style attack as opposed to a stationary war with nothing moving. The ideology was different, and the goal of world domination was different. No longer was he satisfied with each country having its own territory for its own people. He was hell bent on world domination. Now, this view of a master race dominating and ruling the world is a view we don't hear today. Today's fights between Democrats and Republicans, it's all silly games in comparison to what we saw that time. One of the things which was interesting in World War II is that what were previously allies became enemies. Italy, under Benito Mussolini, was an ally in World War I of what were the allies, the French, the British, and the Soviets, and the Americans. But the Italians switched sides under Benito Mussolini in World War II. Because of the Treaty of Versailles, the Italians contributed manpower and war materials to the war effort, but they walked away from the Treaty of Versailles. They felt empty-handed. And so in World War II, Italy was on the side of Nazi Germany, not on the side of the Allies like in World War I. Up until 1943, when Benito Mussolini was killed and strung up by the Italian people, and then at the end of World War II, Italy switched sides back again to the Allies. But remember, Mussolini ruled Italy for 20 years before Hitler ever arrived on the scene. He was the example to Hitler of what a fascist Nazist state looks like. Now, what is the difference between fascism and Nazism? Because people use those words interchangeably. Let's take 5 minutes to talk about that. Fascism is an authoritarian regime which is a combination of nationalism and corporatism. What does that mean? When the head of a corporation, let's say for example, Jamie Dimon, which is the head of JP Morgan Chase, was to become the US Treasury Secretary, the head of the government in charge of the US Treasury, that would be an example of corporatism, where a member of the private sector in charge of that banking would then become a member of the government. And then after he leaves the government, he becomes back a member of banking. Or let's say you have somebody who is regulated by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Now you have lobbyists which work against the Environmental Protection Agency. Now imagine a lobbyist who's working against the EPA becomes a member of the EPA. In other words, it's a musical chairs between government roles and the private sector. So the goal is to have elections, but the outcome is already known. There is no really free elections. Stifle free speech of any opposition. Create a state-run media. Label the press as the Lügenpresse, the lying press. And have state-run control of entertainment, press, speech, thought, and all political opposition. All political opposition is either jailed or moved out of business by bankrupting them or killed eventually. The state is formed around an all-powerful, all-knowing leader, which is seen as a father figure for the nation as a whole. And the word fascism comes from the word fascisti, hand in glove, where the good of the nation state is better than the good of the individual, meaning that the goal of private enterprise and the government is to work hand in hand for the good of the people of that state, as opposed to work for the good of the people independently of the goods of business. The role of government and business is merged. So unlike socialism, which seeks to disband private enterprise, fascism incorporates private enterprise as part of its governing philosophy. And in Italy, they also wanted the support of the Catholic Church, since the Catholic Church was the dominant religion in Italy and still is. And so in this model, you incorporate religion in support of the government so that all three branches are connected: religion, the state, and private enterprise into one cohesive entity under one common governing philosophy. Another goal of fascism is to punish those who have punished you. Okay, let's break that down. If you look at FDR and the Great New Deal, the United States was recovering from the Great Depression of 1929. The whole world was in a Great Depression. He had 25% unemployment. People were starving. People lost their houses. We had dust bowls where the crops couldn't be grown. What did Franklin Roosevelt do? He consulted with Jonathan Maynard Keynes, a British economist, who created a model where you regulate interest rates to cool inflation by raising interest rates, and you lower interest rates to improve recession, and you create government deficit spending to juice the economy, to move it forward. And then he created public works projects through the New Deal. So what Roosevelt did was he turned inward to help the economy from collapsing after the Great Depression through public works projects. But in fascism, you do the opposite. You blame other nationalities and countries as the cause of your ills and attack them. And you attack other countries that caused you your problems. So Benito Mussolini attacked his former allies in World War I and then used it to attack territories he felt owed to him. And he attacked Ethiopia for oil and other reasons. So in fascism, you blame the ills of your country's economic woes on foreign sources as the main cause of your foes. And you seek revenge against your foes for the good of your nation state. And extreme nationalism are the key hallmarks of fascism. Now, what is the difference with Nazism? Nazism has the same characteristics as fascism, but Nazism then takes it a step further by creating ovens to burn people. So fascism is corporatism combining private and corporate power under one umbrella for the good of the nation state with an extreme nationalist outlook. But the racist element is not as strong as in Nazism. In Nazism, you had the final solution to burn Jews in ovens as the cause of all of Europe's problems historically. And the final solution involved the killing of 6 million Jews in Auschwitz and other burn camps. There were medical experiments done on people, skin grafts done, castration done. There was all kinds of experiments done on human beings because they were not considered human beings. They were considered rats. They were not considered human. They were considered subhuman. They were considered the vermin of society. So when you refer to an entire nationality of people as vermin and subhuman, now you're moving from fascism to Nazism. You're creating the idea that a single nationality or race of people are the cause of all your ills. And unemployment problems, banking problems, economic woes. You're taking a problem because your country was bankrupted by the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, which is what actually happened. And instead, you're blaming Jews for all your problems. That's the difference between Nazism and fascism. It's very similar, but you're taking it a step further by having ovens where you burn people. You create concentration camps where you burn people, where you house people. And you create a hatred toward certain nationalities of people. And you get the masses to follow you. Remember, Hitler and Mussolini came to power legally, not illegally. Now, so much for this little bit of a history lesson. Now, what other country joined Germany in World War II that was inside of the Allies in World War I? Romania. Romania is on one side you have Hungary, here's Romania, and here's Ukraine. So Galicia and Bessarabia are in what became Moldova, which was annexed from Romania in World War II by the Soviets. And they're stuck between a hard and a rock place. On the one hand, they could have joined Hungary, its former masters in World War One, or they had to go along with the Soviets, which they feared. So they had to choose between leaning toward Hungary, which, like in World War One, was on the side of the Germans, or they could lean toward the Soviets. They chose to go with the Germans. So Romania was on the side of the Nazis, and the Republic of Moldova of the former Soviet Union, they speak Romanian, not Russian. And Romanian, for those who don't know, sounds a lot like Italian. It's a Romance language, very close to what Italian sounds like. So Romania and Italy, allies in World War One, became allied powers. I mean, Nazi-related allying powers in World War II. Okay. So this is a brief intro. I'm now going to play some video clips from that time period, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to do a voiceover where possible. In this video, I'm going to also do links to the National Archives, where I gathered some of the videos. Other videos are from other YouTube channels. I'm using it under a fair use policy because I'm simply demonstrating an idea. And away we go. Part 1, historical context, coming up. This was the intro. Thank you.
Senators and representatives, I have the distinguished honor of presenting the President of the United States.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us. hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
In 1939, Hitler and Stalin signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Neither planned to fight yet, both needed time. Stalin especially knew the USSR wasn't ready yet after years of turmoil from the Russian Civil War, where the USSR became the USSR, where the Bolsheviks, Mensheviks, and Kulaks and the White Army all battled for control. By 1939, Poland had been crushed, and Czechoslovakia had already been handed over to Hitler through Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's appeasement. The Winter War also pushed Finland back from Leningrad, now known today as St. Petersburg, securing the northern approach. Stalin understood a war with Germany was inevitable, but hoped to delay it. Then, in June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. The Germans advanced rapidly, but Hitler didn't expect Stalin to bring in fresh Siberian divisions west, opening the second front that would eventually destroy the Third Reich.
again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do, till the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away. And I will just to the folks that you know, tell them I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as I saw you go, you were singing this song. Some sunny day.
Wie schwer auch die Krise im Augenblick sein mag, sie wird durch unseren unabänderlichen Willen, durch unsere Opferbereitschaft und durch unsere Fähigkeiten am Ende.
This was Hitler's last speech because he was paranoid to show in public and was very addicted to drugs at that point. He says approximately, my best translation is, he speaks in third person. For the sixth time since the beginning of the war, the National Socialist leader speaks to you today, to his people. 5 years ago began the struggle in which our people once again find themselves engaged in a hard battle. But it would not be the first time in our history that the German people, after the heaviest blows of fate, have risen again. Many times in the past, our people have stood at the edge of collapse, only to work their way back to greatness through their own strength. We have experienced hard times in this war, but the German soldier at the front, the German woman at home, the German worker at factories and workplaces have always proven that they can be harder than the suffering inflicted upon them by their enemies. In this difficult time, I appeal to the German people, to their endurance, their beliefs, and their courage. Let every German be conscious that today everything is at stake, our people, our land, and our future. Now, some historical context. Why does he say all this? Because they were losing the war, and it was not much later that the war was completely lost. So he is making a speech on the 12th anniversary of the Nazi seizure of power from 1933 to 1945. The Soviet Red Army had crossed into German territory. It was almost near Berlin at this point. The Allied forces were advancing from the west, and after the failure of the Germany's Ardennes offensive, Battle of the Bulge, German cities had been devastated by air raids day and night. Morale among soldiers and the civilians was extremely low. Hitler became increasingly isolated in his bunker in Berlin and appeared less frequently in public, and he tried to reassure his nation. Why only an audio broadcast as opposed to a video broadcast? He had tremors and declining mobility. He was visibly aging and weak. He had increased paranoia. He had multiple assassination attempts on him, by the way. He rarely appeared in public after July 20th, 1944 assassination attempt. And so he avoided public appearances. I'm about to show you now how it all plays out. This video has been long, but I hope it's been educational. It's hard to summarize a 5-year war in a 1-hour video. I hope you participate. we're about to see the photographs of the big three. The Yalta Conference is what you're watching in this video clip. In February of 1945, as the war in Europe neared its end, the leaders of the Allied powers met in the Crimean resort of Yalta. On screen are the three men who would shape the post-World War. Franklin Roosevelt, President of the United States, represented a nation whose industrial capacity and manpower had become decisive to the Allied victory. Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, led a country that endured years of bombing, isolation, and total war in defense of Europe. And finally, Joseph Stalin, leader of the Soviet Union, lost 22 million people, commanded an army that absorbed catastrophic losses while pushing German forces back across Eastern Europe. These three leaders, often referred to as the Big Three, met not as equals in ideology, but as partners bound by necessity. Their dislike of each other, of being a capitalist country versus a communist country, was irrelevant. They faced a bigger enemy than each of their hatreds for each other in the form of Hitler. Each arrived at Yalta with different priorities. Roosevelt sought a stable post-war order and the creation of international institutions to prevent future global conflict. Churchill aimed to preserve British influence and prevent Europe from falling under total domination by any single power. Stalin, whose forces occupied much of Eastern Europe, was focused on security, control, and the creation of buffer states between the Soviet Union and the West. At Yalta, decisions were made that would reshape Europe for decades. Germany would be divided into occupation zones. Borders were redrawn, and nations liberated from German control would, in practice, fall within spheres of influence determined by military presence rather than political choice. Although the conference was presented as a step towards peace, it marked the beginning of a new kind of conflict. The agreements reached at Yalta reflected the realities of power at the war's end, and those realities would harden the prolonged confrontation between East and West. This transition from open